Hey, this is the Level Up Engineering Podcast, where we talk with some of the most successful tech leaders who reveal actionable management insights that help you take your developer team to the next level. This episode was brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.
Welcome to the Level Up Engineering Podcast. I am Karolina Tóth, and today our guest is Rob Volk, CEO and founder of Foxbox Digital. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are glad to have you on the show. First of all, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Rob. I'm the CEO of Foxbox Digital, as you said. We're an engineering-focused digital agency. And, in my past life, I was CTO of some startups. And so I really am a software engineer at heart. I have a technical background, and now I'm leading an agency.
Awesome. So today our topic is building company culture. We will go through this topic, kind of look around what's there and pick your mind for the best pieces of advice for our listeners. Do you have a company culture document? What's in there? Is there anything that's not in there but should be in there? Please tell us about it.
Sure. Yes. So we do have a culture document. I can give a few examples of what is in there. So a couple examples are the client isn't always right. So I encourage my team to challenge them gracefully. It's kind of counterintuitive, but often we've found that we have a really good idea of our client's goals. And sometimes we may be asked to do things that we don't feel aligned to them. So we encourage people to challenge them. At the same time, we also encourage our team to challenge leadership. I think we're aware enough to know that we're not always right. And so we like when people challenge us gracefully, right, in the right way. Other things we have are, we encourage everyone to be deeply focused. And so I give everyone permission to close Slack and just really focus on whatever it is you're trying to build. Get it done, and then take a Slack break later. So those are just some examples of things that we have in our cultural doc.
Is there anything that you have excluded from there purposefully?
Yeah, if you look at like some companies' culture docs, there's a list of very obvious things in there. And so we've specifically included them because they're obvious, they're givens. And so we try to cut into what sets us apart and what's meaningful or actionable, not just like, do the right thing. It's like, well, of course you should. So let's cut into the meat of it.
Mm-hmm. So now that we have established that you have a cultural document, what was the process of you putting it together? And first of all, what motivated you to put it together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we've always had a really strong culture, but I think that, in the beginning, it was just sort of accidental, right? It was just like, I hire people that I think are great, and then it just formed organically. But now we're at about 30 or so people, and so we're at a point where we've had some cultural mishires, we've had some contentions and some issues, right, that are signals of a bad culture. And so we kind of took a pause and said, okay, how do we distill the good parts of our culture together? Like, distill it down to something. How do we formalize it? And the purpose there is so that as we scale, that we maintain that culture and that it's no longer this accidental culture. It's predictable. We know that we can grow with it.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of the first steps of putting it together after you have decided that you will need something that kind of crystallizes your culture? And also, who did you involve? Who were the key stakeholders in a sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it sort of happened organically as over time, we've just taken note of things that were meaningful to our culture and set us apart, right? So I think it just kind of grew over time. But then, I involved some key leaders in my company, some engineers and some other people that are close to my company and who have seen the culture from afar as well. So, people inside and also outside. So we just kind of took everything that we collected and bookmarked in our minds and then just sat down and just started writing it down. The process probably took about 2 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a collaboration and many iterations of it to get it right.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that you say that you have asked for outsiders' perspective. Could you elaborate on that? Whose perspectives did you engage in?
He's someone that works with us on like a contract basis for some things, and he works with us over time, right? But not like every day, all day. And so he kind of has that outside perspective. I think it's important because, when you're like inside a problem, sometimes you can't see the solution. So, you ask a coworker and then they magically know it. And so we just kind of took that approach with him.
That's awesome. Thank you. It sounds really interesting, like a good relationship that you must have had for him to be involved in your
Absolutely.
documentation. So once it was done, what was the impact of the company culture documentation?
Yeah, so we rolled it out a few months ago. The immediate response was the first new hire cohort that we had a formal training of the cultural doc. They were blown away, right? So the immediate response was they were just like floored by it. Specifically, the cultural section was nice. So, what I do is every new hire cohort, I have a remote, meeting on Zoom, and I cover the cultural docs. I go through everything there. It's really important, right, that it's not a pre-recorded thing. This is done live. This is meaningful. So the immediate response was really, really positive, and that obviously sets up for a good career. Other things were just like just kind of small changes. So we're seeing people, on our like closed Slack rule, right? We're seeing people getting work done, not being immediately responsive on Slack, and then coming back and being responsive, and that's good in our eyes. That's what we want, right? We're seeing signs of better communication, even at like contentious times, right? And so we have a kindness matters, no jerks rule. And so we're seeing that come in. And, even if you disagree, that's fine to disagree, but it's like, how do you respond to that? You got to see the other's point of view and explain yours and see if you can come to an agreement. So we're seeing just better communication. We're far from perfect. We're still having issues, of course, but it's definitely going in the right direction. So I'm happy with the results so far.
So what I'm hearing is that putting this together actually resulted in some positive behavior change on the side of the organization. And that sounds like it was really worth the effort. Let's look on the bigger scale, and please tell me what you think are the signs of a healthy company culture.
I mean, the signs of the healthy company culture are, we saw things firsthand where arguments being resolved amicably and stuff. I think the more obvious signs, though, are like on the unhealthy company culture. For instance, like when we had somewhat of an unhealthy company culture, right? Or at least certain things, right? So we saw, let's say, we had defensiveness, right? So we had a defensive developer who refused to look at his own code for problems, kept pointing fingers. That was a sign of an unhealthy aspect of our company culture. Or like a developer who is sassy with one of our clients, or a consulting company, we have to hold ourselves a certain way. And so we saw these signs happening, and that really triggered, that was one of the triggers also to make sure that we correct, we hold on to things that are good and correct the things that are bad.
So if we think about developers and communications and being an agency, what would you say to our listeners? How should they develop and sustain a culture that they like?
Sure. That's a great question. So, obviously the first step is, as we've been talking about, you have to define it, right? You have to do some soul searching and really put words to the aspects of your culture that exist, right? So you have to be aware of your own culture and then, write it down. Two, you have to roll it out. So for us, that starts with, one-on-one training or one-on-a-few training from the CEO. Three, this is probably the most important. You have to lead by example. And so, for instance, if you have a don't be late rule, the CEO has to arrive a minute early to every meeting, right? And then the engineering managers have to arrive a minute early, developers as well. We don't actually have that rule because I'm not that good at it. So I can't be a hypocrite, right? So you have to lead by example. And then the fourth thing that kind of ties it together is you want to hold people accountable. And so we actually are including this as part of our performance reviews as well.
So there is some kind of an actual outcome for the developers' feedbacks or for their performance reviews?
Absolutely, yeah. In our performance review, we look at our OKRs, our objective key results for the company and for you as an individual. We look at your performance, and then how are you doing as far as our culture docs? Are you upholding the values, that we have as a company.
We've been through a lot of things about what specifically applies to your company. How do you think our listeners should go about building a culture that encourages creativity?
I just read a great book about this, actually, the Pixar story. And so they're a creative company entirely. If you want to encourage creativity, some things that you'd want to do are you want to encourage people to take risks. You want to make it okay to fail. You want to make it okay to make mistakes, right? You want to remove the time pressure and give people the time it takes, because you can't force creativity. So your values certainly change if you're like a results-oriented organization versus a creative-oriented organization.
Awesome. And you said that your company culture document is kind of embedded in the feedback that developers get. So they kind of have to adhere by the cultural document. Is this document the code of conduct for the company, or is there some freedom to diverge from the document? How does this work?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we recognize that everyone's an individual. Everyone has their own personalities, and that's fine. Like, we want you to have your own personality and act as such. I view them more as guidelines. There's clearly things that are not acceptable, like defensiveness, right? That's just in general, like, not a good trait. But the rest of them, it's really guidelines. How in general to conduct yourself as an employee of Foxbox Digital, a team member of Foxbox Digital.
How do you monitor that your developers actually behave according to these guidelines?
That's a difficult one, right? At our company, we have a weekly leadership call where we discuss things that went well, things that didn't. So certainly when problems arise, like, I hear about them then. There's also weekly architecture calls for the architects. There's PM calls for the PMs. And so kind of in those various calls, I think things float up to the appropriate people.
I see. So it's kind of like on an individual level that information flows throughout the company. So what are some of the everyday actions that our listeners can take to improve their company's culture?
Yeah, really, the thing you have to do is just lead by example. Like, as an engineering manager, you have a team that looks up to you. And so every day with your actions, you have to uphold the company's values. That makes them real. That takes them from, words on a piece of paper to actions, which are much stronger. I mean, on the opposite too, if you blatantly disregard things in the culture, it nullifies them, right? It says that, oh, that's meaningless. The company says this, but my manager is doing this, and so it doesn't mean it. And so, no matter who you are, right? If you're an engineer, QA person, an engineering manager, an executive, you have to lead by example, and everyone has to be aligned. Otherwise, you have a problem.
What I gather is that you guys really proactively put together something that reflects the current state of affairs in your company. So the culture was really taken a blueprint of rather than consciously created. My question is, have you ever encountered some things that were cultural but you wanted to change? And if so, how did you change it?
That's a good question. I mean, I alluded to it earlier, where we had a developer who was, sassy with the client, right? And I guess I can go into that a little bit. So first of all, I mean, he's an excellent engineer and he's still on our team, but with his brilliance came an ego or just an inability to communicate sometimes, right? And so we worked to do that, to change that behavior. In one case, he was trying to implement. It was a front end for like a machine learning component. And basically the way it was designed, it was not going to work. It was not a good implementation. The designer didn't know this because he didn't know like the intricacies of AI. And so the engineer just went and built it in his own implementation. He didn't tell our product manager. He just went straight to the UX designer and said, oh, this is how I'm doing it. You're wrong. And this is why. We were surprised because we didn't even know about it. The client then came to us and said, oh, what's going on? Your guy built it not to spec. And our PM was surprised. She was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So like that was just a series of fails there, right? And so what we did was at the end, I took note and I was like, hey, you're right. Your implementation was correct. The designs weren't done right. And it's fine to go and go spike it out and go build something to see, you know, to kind of test out your idea. That's fine. We also did it like, you know, late at night or something. But first thing in the morning, I wish you had come to your product manager and explained why the designs weren't right, why you think your solution is. Go talk to your architect also and get his buy-in. And then we can come to the client and the product manager can explain to the client why, try to sell them on our idea. So that would have been like the correct process. It was a catastrophe, really. At the end of it, we came out and we saved ourselves, but we did have to do some cultural cleanup there.
Behaviors are hard to change. Those things don't happen overnight. How long does it take to change a company's culture?
Well, with this specific engineer, we're seeing incremental changes. I'll put it that way.
Nice.
And I guess it's kind of the same thing. If you're looking to change things, it's difficult to change. It takes a lot of time. One of the real benefits of having a cultural doc is if you put elements of your cultural doc onto your job posts, you're going to then attract talent that resonate with what you're saying, right? And then at the same time, we publish our culture. It's for internal purposes, but we publish it on our website, and pieces of it, flow through to our marketing message. And so we also then attract clients, with whom we resonates. So I think it's a lot harder to change actions and behaviors and personalities, but it's a lot easier to attract people that already naturally fit your culture, and not 100%, but mostly fit it. And that's all we ask for.
Right. So we kind of got into this too. We assume that people who will apply, having read your company culture document, will at least agree with some of the things that are stated on there. But do you check at all if somebody is a good cultural fit?
Certainly, we try to check. I wish I had a bulletproof method to suss out if someone's a cultural fit. What it comes down to really is just frankly a conversation with them. So we have our operations manager does the cultural interviews with all of our candidates. She's just really in tune with our culture, and she's actually taken on the role of captain culture. And so she tries to just improve the company's culture overall. So she just has a conversation with them, and it really just turns out to be a gut check, right? Like, do we feel by the way they're carrying themselves that they align with our values?
This is kind of off the shelf, but I have been talking to a lot of people from all around the world, and there seems to be kind of two camps. One of them saying, you should just really hire for diversity and have people kind of expand your culture as they join in the company. And you have people who are more on we have a culture, so we are looking for people who will fit right into our culture. Which side would you recommend, or are you on?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I mean, of course, you want a diverse set of people, right? In all aspects. I mean, you want people to think differently. That's how you'll deliver the best results. If everyone thinks exactly the same way, like you're going to fall on your face. So obviously, you want a diverse culture. But the things in the doc, I don't think that they exclude diversity. I think the opposite. I think the things in here are, they're common threads, right? For instance, we have a core belief that, we're puzzle solvers. We want people who are naturally inquisitive and to want to figure out a problem, and that's at all levels. Now, I think that people of all walks can be puzzle solvers, right? And so I think that you can have both. But also, we don't expect that you adhere to 100% of our core beliefs, our values, right? And so I think with looking at this as a set of guidelines, I mean, it opens up to individuality as well.
Thank you. It has been a very enlightening conversation. We have talked about your process and motivation for putting the company culture documentation together. We have talked about the people whom you involved in this process and frankly upholding this company culture document in the everyday life. Would you like to add anything else to our conversation? Is there anything that we haven't touched on?
No, I think we've touched on a little bit of everything. I'd like to just share a little something, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Just wanted to say a little bit about my company. So, we're Foxbox Digital. We're a digital agency. We focus, really heavily on mobile and web technologies like React Native and Elixir. And so I just want to say that we're always hiring developers, project managers, automated QA engineers. So, if you're interested, please reach out.
All right. And if so, how can others find you if they want to follow your work or get in touch with any of the ideas that we have discussed here?
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to connect with Foxbox Digital on LinkedIn, connect with me personally on LinkedIn. And we also have a blog, foxbox.com/blog, where we post a lot of interesting things about our company. We try to kind of open source, our culture, our processes, things about development, all sorts of things.
Awesome. So it should be a good source of information for everyone. Thanks for joining us today, Rob.
Carolina, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for staying with Level Up Engineering. Today, our guest was Rob Volk, CEO and founder of Foxbox Digital. Do you have feedback or topics that you would like us to explore on the show? Send your ideas to levelup@codingsense.com. I am Carolina Toth, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks for staying with Level Up Engineering. If you enjoyed this podcast, so will your friends. Share this episode on your favorite social networking platform. To stay up to date with our content, follow Level Up Engineering on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast. Brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.